Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Very warm welcome to our webcast. I can see that still a number of participants are connecting, so please just give us 2 more minutes and we will start at 10:05. Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for dialing in. We are still waiting for a couple of participants that are just connecting. So please stay with us and we will start in 1 minute. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Very warm welcome to our webcast that EY is organizing in cooperation with British Chamber of Commerce, Czech Republic, American Chamber of Commerce in the Czech Republic, and the Canadian Chamber of Commerce in the Czech Republic. Thank you very much for connecting. We will be covering today a very important topic of employees and employers in a virus and post-virus era. My name is Martina Knajfová, and I will be one of the presenters today. We will start with an introductory topic that will cover all the potential situations your employees can be in the current situation, and also, of course, the antivirus program of the Czech government. Then we will look at home office arrangements and potential tax implications, not only from the Czech perspective, but also from some international point of view. Then my colleague Tomáš Pevný will cover the future aspects, what we shall do with employees in the future, how to motivate them, etc. And then another colleague, John Wilkinson, will cover a very important topic of employee integration, potential fraud, and all the issues that are connected with this area. I would like to support you and to encourage you to ask questions during the webcast. We will definitely monitor them and we will try to respond to as many questions as possible after the end of the presentations. If we will not be able to cover all the questions, we will then come back to you individually. Just for you to know, you cannot see other questions except for those that you are asking yourself, but we are able to see who was asking the question, including the email address. So if we are not able to respond to you during the webcast, we will do so individually by email. In addition to that, of course, you will be provided a presentation from the today webcast with all the contact details. So please do feel free to reach out to us if you have a question that you for some reason do not want to ask during the seminar. We will not be providing you with a recording, unfortunately, but maybe take it as another motivator to be with us for the whole hour. Let me start now with the antivirus program and home office considerations that are very important for our clients from many sectors. I would like to start with a brief overview of all the potential scenarios where you could see your employees right now. Of course, the employers are in very different situations. Some of them are operating quite normally, even maybe more than usual. So their employees are working as usual and getting their usual salary, and you are incurring the usual costs, meaning salary and social security and health insurance costs. Of course, some employees are working from home, but this does not have any impact on their remuneration. In some cases, we have seen employers and employees agreeing on some reduced working arrangements, meaning reduced working hours and reduced salary, which means, in fact, a decrease in the costs of the employer, so no additional costs to be incurred. Some employers are agreeing on vacations with their employees, and then, of course, standard labor law principles covering the vacation rules are used. Many parents actually need to spend time with their kids at home because of the closed schools. In those situations, they can benefit from a state support in the form of a child care benefit, which means that in those situations, there is no cost incurred by the employer. Those are two red-boxed situations are those that are in fact covered by the antivirus program that we shall discuss in a minute. The first one is a whole set of situations when the employer is not able to assign work to the employees in the usual working hours. So it means there are certain obstacles on the part of the employer. In those situations, the employees are entitled to a wage reimbursement that ranges from 60 to 100% of their average earnings based on the reason, and of course based also on the agreement internally at the employer. And in those situations, of course, there is a cost incurred for the employer despite the fact that no work is actually performed by the employee. And the last but not least is the situation when the individual, the employee, is subject to a quarantine, which means that he is in fact entitled to a sick pay, which is in the first 14 days paid by the employer. It's based on reduced average earnings. If sick pay is not subject to tax and not subject to social security, is paid within the state limits, which means that there is no social security and health insurance due by the employer from this payment. The antivirus program was launched by the Czech government on the 6th of April, and it covers the period from the 12th March until yesterday. It was planned for the end of April, so in fact 1.5 months. Yesterday, the government approved the extension of the program for May, so it should cover 2.5 months based on the current plans. This antivirus program is a program of potential partial reimbursements of costs that are borne by the employers in certain situations, and of course we will get to that later. It is only meant for business employers, and they can't be in bankruptcy or liquidation. The basic rule when the reimbursements are possible is that the employer strictly complies with the labor code. It is meant only for employees that are in employment relationship, the regular one called pracovní poměr in Czech. Those employees need to be subject to Czech sickness and pension insurance. So for foreigners, it only applies if they are employed under Czech labor contract, Czech labor law, and if they are subject to the Czech social security and health insurance system. And because the whole program is aimed at preventing unemployment, it only covers employees who are not given notice or who are not in the notice period. The antivirus program has two separate regimes that are in fact also reconciled separately. The regime A is meant for two situations: for the ordered quarantine, where the individual gets a sick pay from his employer for the first 14 days of the quarantine. The sick pay is, as I said, based on reduced average earnings. Maximum sick pay is a bit above 200 crowns per hour. The second potential situation for the regime A is the closure of business directly based on the government or other state authority order. So in fact, for example, if based on the decision of the government, the employer had to close its operations or part of its operations. In that situation, the employee is entitled to 100% of his average earnings as a wage compensation. The regime A enables the state to compensate 80% of paid wage compensation, including employer social security and health insurance costs. So 80% of the incurred total employer cost. There is a cap which amounts to 39,000 crowns per employee per month. Regime B actually aims at all the other situations of the obstacles to work on the part of the employer. So on situations when the employer is not able to assign work to the employees for all the other reasons other than the closure of the operations by the government or state authority order. So it can be a situation when the employee actually cannot work because there is too high number of employees already missing from work, for example, because of childcare or because of quarantine. Then it can be some limitation of the availability of inputs necessary for the operations of the employer. And then I think this might be applicable for the majority of the employers actually participating in this program. It can be a reduced demand for services, products of the employer. The labor code actually establishes some ground rules for the amount of reimbursements to be paid. Of course, it's up to the employer to decide whether he or she will provide a higher compensation than the necessary minimum set by the labor law. The regime B actually enables the state to compensate 60% of the paid wage compensation, including the employer social security and health insurance, and the maximum compensation is 29,000 per employee per month. What is very important to mention for both the regimes A and B is that the cap, the maximum amount of compensation per month per employee, is actually not reduced by the length of obstacles. So, for example, for the month of March, when the covered period only started on the 12th of March, the cap remains the same. So there is no difference if it takes half a month, a few days, or, for example, if the individual is subject to the obstacles only for part of his working hours. The compensation can only be paid if the employer actually incurs the cost. So if he actually pays the wage compensation to the individuals and if he settles the social security and health insurance employer part of contributions. The process is fully electronic. Of course, always when the intentions are good, sometimes things go a bit worse than expected. So it is not as straightforward process as we would expect. There is a potential for many mistakes to be made, and we have seen many delays on part of the labor offices. For example, especially in Prague, it just takes much more time than expected. What is important to know is that there is no need to provide any evidence of the reason of the obstacles, for example, or the reason for the wage compensation at the time when you are applying for the compensation. But you should be prepared for very thorough audits in the future, for which you will need to store as much evidence as you can have. Unfortunately, it is very difficult to say now what evidence will be actually required by the authorities in the future, but our recommendation is to keep as much documents as possible. For example, for the decrease of the demand for your products, you should keep evidence of the cancelled orders, or you should have evidence of the differences in the turnover, etc., etc. I've promised to cover some issues related to home office arrangements because we are seeing many employees of our customers, of our clients, working from home. The labor code in the Czech Republic is, I would say, quite vague. There is a very tiny, not very used provision in the labor code, and all the previous amendments that were planned to cover the home office arrangements were cancelled during the legislative process. So there is no real guidance. There is just one guidance that is applicable that says that the individual, the employee, is entitled to reimbursement to proved incurred expenses that are clearly related to the work performed. This has also very important tax implications, and the tax law is quite strict in this regard, and it really requires reimbursement of proved expenses, meaning that if you are providing a lump sum reimbursement to your employees, you can end up with the full taxability of this provided reimbursement. There were some attempts by the Czech Chamber of Tax Advisors to actually have some more favorable regime for the current situation. Unfortunately, the authorities are not willing to do anything with that. One more point that I wanted to mention, we are seeing many employers that are trying to actually assign some work to people who are taking care of children and benefiting for the state support. Unfortunately, such concurrence is not possible. So if the individual works, he's entitled to salary. If he wants to have this state benefit, he is not able to work. Last but not least, I wanted to cover some international, very important tax and social security aspects of the current situation. You know that the home office arrangements can have very interesting consequences from the tax and social security perspective. So, for example, if your employees are working from home but not from the Czech Republic, which happens a lot and I would say surprisingly often. OECD reacted quite quickly. They have issued a guidance or a recommendation how the current situation should be viewed from the international tax perspective. They are covering the permanent establishment creation, tax residence of corporations based on place of effective management, also taxation of employees and their tax residence. And in a nutshell, OECD says the current epidemic or pandemic situation should not be taken into account when you are assessing the tax implications of the situation. So if your employee is working currently from home office abroad, he should not become taxable there. It should not have impact on the creation of your permanent establishment in that country, and it should not have impact on his tax residence. Unfortunately, the current reaction of the Czech tax authority is quite negative. They are quite hesitant to accept and follow the OECD recommendation. We still believe that their opinion will change once they will see how other countries react. But in current situation, they are saying, well, we are just following the provisions of the valid double tax treaties and the valid legislation. And unless those are changed, there is no change in our interpretation of those provisions. Second aspect that is quite important and that also is related to the current situation and working from home from a different country is the application of social security legislation. You know that based on the EU rules, an individual is subject just to one social security legislation, and it's in fact related to the work where the work to the place where the work is performed. In situations when the individual works in several countries, there are very specific rules, and all the uses of specific rules under the EU regulations are confirmed by certificates of coverage that are called A1 certificates. Very fortunately, the Czech authorities are quite positive in this respect. They are saying that the current situation should not be treated as the key thing or a decisive factor in the assessment of the applicable country, applicable social security legislation. And it seems that this is the same pattern that is taken by other countries as well. From those that are very important for us, let's just mention Slovakia, Poland, or Austria, or Germany, because it can be also relevant for the assessment of home offices of your employees. So that actually closes my part of the presentation, and I I'm very happy to pass over the word to my colleague, Tomáš Perný.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I will be talking about employees in the future, their motivation and remuneration in this a bit crazy coronavirus times, and mainly after, hopefully, these times are over and we go back more or less to normal. What about the employees in the future? Obviously, we do not have a crystal ball. We can't tell you exactly what will happen, but we can say that the changing environment will bring some new trends and will strengthen some existing trends in HR. There's a list of few. On the next slide, there will be a few more. Let me just mention or share with you a few thoughts on some of them. I think that we will definitely see more investment in HR digitalization and cloud solutions. Companies who had implemented cloud solutions definitely benefited from those during the corona pandemic, because obviously it was much easier to manage workflow, manage employees and all the processes if you have been using cloud solutions. We think there will be much more focus on digitalization and automation of HR processes. Companies will be identifying which processes can be automated, not only because of the recent experience with the reliance on technology, but also because of the cost pressure. And quite likely, especially if some restrictions prevail for a longer time, we will see more focus on online recruitment and onboarding of employees. Actually, some of our clients have already contacted us with a task to help them implement online recruitment and onboarding solutions. So it can happen that in the future we will end up with employees whom we will actually not see for some time, or see them for the first time after they have spent some time with the company already. Some other trends I'd like to mention is definitely flexibility of work arrangements. There are many companies, especially in the Czech market, who are still a bit stuck culturally in the previous century, and not even the change of the preferences of the coming generations to the labor market convince them that it makes sense to introduce flexibility of work arrangements. And obviously this pandemic must have helped them realize that this is not sustainable in long term, and they will be forced to think about introducing more flexibility into the work arrangements of their employees in the future. Home office as a standard, it doesn't mean that everybody will be working from home for sure, but I think the biggest or quite important learning point from the crisis is that businesses and sectors where it seemed inconceivable or impossible that the employees would work from home suddenly realized that it is possible and it actually works well. So I believe that we will be seeing much more home office work in the future as well. Agile reskilling and upskilling of employees. This is mainly in connection with these changes or with the changes of the environment, which we'll be probably facing, which obviously are not known in the full extent yet, but employees will definitely need to be better equipped for those changes, especially in the technology area, maybe also in the area of management of employees, because people working from home obviously require a different management skill set. Let me talk briefly also about the concept of total rewards, which is a concept that EY has been promoting for some time in the past. It consists of a core total rewards such as salary, bonuses, paid time off, career framework, etc., so the usual ones, but also of flexible supplemental benefits adjusted to individual employees' needs in the areas of financial, physical, emotional, and social well-being. So basically, total rewards focus on total well-being, and by total well-being, we mean financial, physical, social, and emotional well-being. This concept was very relevant, or has been very relevant until the crisis, especially on the overheated labor market, where many companies were struggling to get enough employees with the right skills at the right time. So they were just wondering what else can we offer them so that we can attract them. Obviously, this will quite likely change. We will see the unemployment rates rising. However, I believe that this concept is going to be still very relevant. And the reason is that, yes, the economy, the sector, the companies are sort of ready or getting ready for remuneration cost reductions. And there will be sectors and companies where these will be quite substantial and quite necessary. Nonetheless, if the concept of total rewards is implemented smartly and reflecting the needs of the existing employees in the company, those who manage that will be actually the winners of the situation, because they might end up with lower total remuneration costs. However, they might end up with the motivation of their employees and the performance of their employees dropping just slightly or relatively less than the overall costs dropped. How to decrease, or what are the ways of decreasing the remuneration costs? Obviously, that's not a rocket science, not something that you would not think of. What we definitely recommend for the future is thorough scenario planning. So the company should think of the most pessimistic, the realistic and optimistic scenarios of the development in their segment, in their business. They should build a financial model of these scenarios and test overall impact of workforce planning decisions. Because obviously not all these decisions will be implemented in all the companies, and not all these decisions or not all these arrangements may be the right ones for every company. So I have their remote work or home office work as the first one, because actually this already is one of the arrangements which can lead to decrease of costs, not only rent, energies, but also time spent traveling for the employees. There are clear savings there. Unpaid leave, as mentioned here, or paid leave, as mentioned here, because that's a measure that has been taken by many companies in the first days of the crisis, but it may be still relevant even for maybe midterm if the company expects that they will pick up the pace again in the near future. It may make sense to agree on an unpaid leave with the employees and then redeploy them when economy is getting better. Reduced working hours, that's an obvious one. Maybe just to mention here, for some companies, it also may be a necessary shift of culture, because some companies are used to sort of crush the grapes so that they get the wine out of them. And so meaning that they definitely prefer full-time employment, ideally with tens of hours of overtime, because only then they believe that the employees provide the best out of them. This will change definitely, or should change, again, not only because of the changes of the generations coming to the labor market, but also because of the pressure on cost reduction. Change of structure of salaries and bonuses. I think that we will see much more emphasis on variable pay, and it's linked to meeting KPIs. Companies will probably, or might be a good idea, to replace bonuses, short-term bonuses, with long-term incentives. The main positives of such a step may be that not only you improve your cash flow, but also from the retention and motivation perspective, when the employees, and when this is communicated well to them, they will know that they are not losing their bonuses forever. However, if the transformation is done correctly, they will get their money in a long-term perspective if the company does well again. And then obviously other measures such as salary and bonus decreases, changes of structure, or reduction of some of the benefits, and last but not least, the most drastic measure, layoffs. All these measures need to be communicated well, timely, and openly, so that the negative impact on motivation and performance of the employees is as low as possible. Lastly, let me just share with you a few thoughts about motivation when working from home office, because obviously that's something that we have been seeing more or less across the sectors. So what are the pitfalls? What are the motivation pitfalls of working from home? There's quite a few of them. It may be a feeling of alienation, loss of loyalty. I remember that the previous Minister of Social Affairs, Ms. Marksová, when she was considering introducing or somehow embedding the home office working into the labor code, she mentioned that the employers should be obliged to provide the opportunity to the employees to go to work and to sort of interact socially with other colleagues, and people were laughing at her. So I believe that after a few weeks of the lockdown, we start to appreciate this sort of perspective, and maybe not that many people laugh anymore. So that's one of the pitfalls as well. Major one, especially for some companies, may be the worsened or lower opportunity to learn by observing others. The feeling of anonymity is something that may impact motivation when working from home, and many others. How can we notice that the motivation drops among the employees working from home? You can see it when deadlines are postponed, projects are not completed in time, the reasons for delays don't make sense, reactions are delayed, people do not respond to emails so quickly as they used to, they don't respond in general. Reports that should be updated are not updated in time, they are not updated thoroughly, they are full of mistakes. People are not available for arrangements or for meetings that have been prearranged. You can spot unwillingness to participate on team events, and you can also sometimes sense negativity to whatever suggestions or new tasks, new projects that are coming into the pipeline. So all these may be signs of dropping motivation among the employees working from home. How can we increase the motivation of these employees? More than ever, when people are working from home, it's quite essential that people build relationships, and especially managers with their employees. They should be showing, or we should be able to show, genuine interest, empathy, active listening. They should not stop sharing personal stuff, because when they meet in the office and they have a chit chat, then definitely they speak about what happened during the weekend, how was the holiday, etc. So this should not end just because we have this conference call or we have this video conference, because without it, the sense of loyalty and the sense of being included, being part of the team, is difficult to build. Another important one is feedback. It must be much more frequent, timely. There should be even more emphasis on positive feedback. The feedback should be both ways. So the managers should be actively asking for upward feedback. They should also be offering help if there are some identified developmental areas. So all these can help to keep or to increase the motivation of employees working from home. And remuneration, last one, how to change the remuneration approach to people working remotely. As I mentioned previously, definitely there should be a much more focus on setting up the right goals, the SMART goals, because it may be a bit more difficult to measure the performance without seeing people on a daily basis, sitting next to each other. So there must be a much smarter goal set, and managers should have tools how to actually measure the performance of the employees working from home. There should be probably, or some companies may need to adopt different perspective of effectiveness for employees working from home, because obviously people working from home may be dealing with different distractions than those they are used to when working from the office. So if hour is the main measurement for effectiveness, then this may need to change, and you should rather focus on keeping the deadlines, no matter whether the person works on the certain project 8 hours as they would have if they had worked on that in the office, but they need 12 hours now because they get interrupted by kids, by the necessity to cook for children, etc. So these are just a few thoughts on motivation and the challenges people might be, or companies, managers, and employees may be facing when people start working more from home. And now I would hand over to John.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Thomas and Martina, for those interesting insights around employee remuneration and indeed employee behaviour. What I wanted to cover with you this morning, ladies and gentlemen, is some of the challenges that you as organisations may face in terms of how to keep flexible under the new arrangements without actually losing control within your organisation. I work in forensics and integrity services, and one of the things that we do is advise organisations how to both deal with fraud and integrity issues when they happen, but also how to prevent those. And just looking at a little bit of more recent history, the impact of the global financial crisis, which was just over 10 years ago, we saw a significant increase in reported fraud. Fraud and integrity issues are often at their most prevalent during downturns and crises, both of which we are experiencing in the COVID-19 environment. And we've already started to see a number of matters arising of integrity challenges and frauds being perpetrated. And unfortunately, we expect some of those to continue. We've seen an increase in cyber attacks and phishing fraud, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail in a minute. We've seen vendor and customer side frauds. Those are actually just in general terms, the most often perpetrated frauds against and integrity challenges that organizations face. So cybercrime, customer and supplier fraud. Obviously, the current situation has led to a series of changing and evolving pressures. We've all seen a shift in resource location, working from home. We've seen a shift in certain responsibilities as individuals have been furloughed or are working on reduced working hours or dealing with different home arrangements. We've seen a change in the speed of operations. Organizations have had to become a lot more flexible in terms of the way that they deal with their counterparties over the last few weeks. We've seen an increased exposure to government interactions. Even the process of applying for and obtaining government grants, government support has increased for many organizations. And of course, allied to a lot of that, there is significantly more problematic document flows. because of those changes in working arrangements. Things aren't as they used to be. And even when organizations start to get back to a degree of normality, hopefully over the next few weeks, but could extend into the next month, I think we would all agree that things are not going to be quite the same again. Thomas already alluded to the fact that the impacts of this crisis may well lead to longer-term structural changes in the way that we employ and recruit talent, but also changes in the remuneration of those employees. And each of those factors can increase the risk that organisations face from fraudsters or those who want to profit from the situation. I'll just spend a minute or two on the pressures and incentives and opportunities that will arise from that, just to hammer that point home. And fraud and integrity challenges effectively happen when three things are there. Firstly, there is a pressure or incentive to commit a fraud or undertake an inappropriate act. There has to be an opportunity to do so. If there was no opportunity to do so, it wouldn't be able to happen. And finally, those who commit those acts have to rationalise those acts. So in terms of motivation, what can motivate the bad behaviour within organisations at the current time? So obviously, money is tight. Household budgets are being stretched. There is considerable uncertainty. There are people who are losing their jobs. There are people who are impacted by reduced working arrangements. There are external pressures on organisations, both by banks and by creditors. And in the current circumstances, it's a lot easier to rationalise some of those into inappropriate behaviour. With sort of, I did not cause this excuses, this is not my fault, I don't see why I should be punished for this happening. And then in the area of loan applications, perhaps the question, well, we didn't quite meet the criteria for support, but it was only by a little bit, or we didn't meet our sales targets, but it was only by a little bit. And if we do something, we might actually be able to achieve some of that variable compensation. So all sorts of differing motivators caused by the crisis and the downturn. Of course, on the opportunity side, that comes to bear because of cost-cutting measures, restructuring of businesses, restructuring of business processes that are happening. The sort of second line of defence is inevitably weakened. Management review and supervision is harder to apply, and the effectiveness of that review is impacted significantly, as is perhaps the ability to follow up on the answers that are being given to questions which are asked when anomalies do arise. So it's a lot easier to rationalise an answer which may be incorrect or inappropriate as being correct, simply because you don't know what the trend should have been in the current environment. So those second and third lines of defence are inevitably weakened and can't compensate for the challenges that are being faced. I'll just give 3 or 4 examples of increases in risk. I talked earlier about customer and supplier fraud, excuse me, being potential threats, as is cybercrime, and I'm going to cover each of those in particular. So what we've started to see already, it was a well-used and well-practiced scheme to defraud organisations prior to COVID-19, but because of the changes, it's perhaps even more easy to perpetrate payment fraud. We've actually seen within the last week a couple of organisations coming to us with these challenges. So account numbers being replaced on valid invoices, so the money goes to the wrong people. Fake payment requests through phishing activities. For those of you who are not familiar with phishing, we'll come on to that in a moment. But it's basically gaining information which allows the perpetrator to appear to be part of an organisation or a supplier organisation where they actually aren't. And the third area would be false or empty invoices, i.e. invoices which are being registered for goods and services which aren't actually delivered. What can you be doing on the mitigation side? Well, one general message is to try and the best you can to ensure that the segregation of duties that you probably have built in to your own control system at the moment continues to be maintained. Easier said than done in an environment where people are working remotely, but it's very important because that is your first line of defense to help ensure that you're not defrauded in those ways. An increased awareness of your employees. So one of our recommendations is that organizations start to talk to their employees around the challenges that they may face and the way the organization wants to help protect and put controls in place to prevent issues. Rotating employees at the moment with real remote working, a big challenge, but worth considering when people get back to work. Second area of risk is on the purchasing of goods and employees. We've started to see, and others have already started commenting about the rise of bogus contractors, contractors with genuine liquidity problems. So you delivering a short notice goods and services, but where the provider of those has got no real intention to pay for those. All of those areas are potential challenges. Our advice to organizations is to double down on reviewing your third parties and extending the diligence over those third parties so that you're sure, firstly, that it is a valid contractor, and secondly, that they're likely to be able to pay for the goods and services that have been delivered. The third area is, and I said I'd come back to this, on cyber attacks and phishing. So we can already see the impact of that within a 5-day period in the middle of March. Known criminal groups had created this is simply within Europe, 3,600 new domains containing the word coronavirus. The aim of many of those domains is to obtain information about your business that can be used either by that organization or sold on to others who will use it to defraud you. We'd already seen the challenge in Brunei's hospitals being subject to a significant cyber attack, which suspended partially their operations for a significant period of time. And we've indeed seen an increase in the number of fake emails purportedly from government organizations. Two elements of that: clicking on links which look to harvest information or place malware on your own systems, but secondly, to gain contributions which you don't get any benefit for. How do you mitigate that? Very important to review your IT infrastructure, engage with your employees again about the challenges relating to cybercrime and phishing, because this is an area where there is indeed little education, and it's so easy in the remote working times to simply forget some of the procedures that employees have been talked about. talk to about. So finally, just summarising all that, how do you find the right balance between compliance and integrity? My proposition is that in these challenging times, you need to move away from your intentions, which is all our employees follow our code of conduct, follow our policies and practices, and we communicate with them in the same way, to an environment where you actually communicate and demonstrate as business leaders what those expected behaviours are. It's far more difficult when we don't have person-to-person interactions to be able to do that. Increase your vigilance in key areas. Be inspiring your employees to apply their own professional skepticism, question demands that don't seem to make any sense. To be aware that fraudsters and those who wish to do us harm like to take advantage of goodwill, and they target us in that way. And to talk to your team members about the risks that they're likely to face. Finally, highlight the positives in terms of the behaviours that people are applying to help address this. Open and consistent communication from yourselves with your employees on this matter will help prevent your organisation and you from issues which you may only see in the next 3, 6 or 9 months, but which are happening today. So highlight the positives and the good behaviours that you see within your organisation to help prevent that. And with that, Martina, I will hand back to you. I think we have some questions to deal with.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you very much, Tomáš. Now we will try to answer at least some of your questions. And as I said, we will definitely share the presentation with all of you, and we will also individually contact you to respond to all the questions that were asked. Actually, I wanted to ask a question that relates to the antivirus program and also partially a question relating to the childcare benefit. The antivirus program, the B, a part of that, the B regime definitely can be used for a part of the employees only. It really does not need to be actually the obstacles for the full working hours. It can be for maybe a day in a week as well. And with regard to the childcare benefit, there is a cap on the maximum amount of benefit. It is a bit more than 1,500 crowns per day as the state contribution that is paid to the employee. So there will be probably a very big difference between the income of the individual who takes care of his kid and gets this benefit comparing to his usual salary if the salary is high. So for example, for a salary that is 200,000 crowns, still it will be 1,500 per day. Tomáš, now I hand over to you. I think you had a very interesting question regarding home office and long-term incentive plans.
Thank you, Martina. On one of my slides, I had this abbreviation of LTIs, which stands for long-term incentives. So apologies for not explaining that properly. The long-term incentives was there when I was mentioning that we might see a focus on rather long-term remuneration, replacing the short-term bonuses because of the cash flow and retention reasons. The long-term incentives, what they are in practice or on the market, we often see option schemes, share schemes. In the Czech market, we usually help clients rather with implementation of phantom share schemes, rather than share schemes, because there are not that many locally based companies who would have shares freely accessible in the market. So we help the clients design long-term incentive plans, long-term remuneration plans, which sort of utilize the advantages of share schemes and bring very, very similar value. And there was a question on effectivity on home office, other measures. I think it really boils down to constant communication clear, and so you need to be in touch with your employees quite often. You need to establish times when you will be in touch with them. Check on them very regularly. They should, all of you or all of the employees should update their calendars regularly. As I said, the feedback should be gathered and delivered constantly. There should be, I'm just thinking about others, there should be a clarity and prioritization of work. So the workload of each employee should be reviewed regularly. The priorities should be rearranged as necessary. So there's many of them. We'll be happy to expand on them on an individual basis if you are interested. And I think John wants to address some questions as well.
Yes, thank you, Thomas. We had a very good question around what do we see as the most vulnerable and risky areas given the change of circumstances. I don't have time to cover that in the full detail, but I'll just give 3 or 4 points which I think are particularly valid. So in terms of the payment fraud schemes that we're seeing, where organisations change their bank account details, that I would anticipate you need to validate with any supplier or indeed customer if it relates to refunds or discounts, and you should be doing that in person rather than via email, because it's quite possible that emails have been spoofed or don't actually reflect the individuals that you think that you're corresponding with. In terms of payments out, I would be undertaking or have someone from your teams undertaking a daily review of the payments that are being made out of your bank account, who they're going to make sure that none of those look particularly unusual. I would be educating your employees around paying attention to emails which come from potentially unknown sources and or validating the email addresses that are being used. Very often we see email addresses which look very similar but aren't exactly the same as those that have been used historically. That's a very easy pickup. And finally, I would be, where you are using new supplier arrangements, check the legitimacy of those suppliers. And my team have quite a lot of experience of doing that. And there are many channels that you can use to help you check that legitimacy. That would be it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are just up on the hour. Thank you very much for your attention. It was a pleasure to present to you. We will be really grateful for your evaluation, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.